Podcast Network's family of shows. Available everywhere podcasts.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hope you guys are enjoying the show. We are in the home stretch with our last two segments. And our last two segments will be two exciting, fascinating college football player profiles about two veterans, both with very different trajectories to how their careers have panned out. Let's start off with the one who has kind of been undervalued. Played in the SEC throughout his entire career. When we think of SEC quarterbacks of recent years, we think about, Carson Beck, Stetson Bennett, Jalen Milroe, Bryce Young, all of these guys. But we always kind of forgot about this guy. And I do want to give him the due respect he deserves, give him his flowers in terms of fantasy option, because he definitely is an intriguing one. Without further ado, let's jump right into the fantasy player profile of Mr. Jaxson Dart. Like I said, think about the SEC, you think about the big guys. You think about the Alabama QBs. You think about the Georgia QBs. You might even think about right now Quinn Ewers coming into this. You might be thinking about Archer Manning in the future. But at the end of the day, Jaxson Dart has always deserved to be in this conversation as one of the better elite college football QBs in the SEC. As soon as he came to Ole Miss, he really revolutionized Lane Kiffin's offense. Lane Kiffin wanted a guy like Jaxson Dart, a lot of moxie, a lot of strength, a lot of determination at the quarterback position to really help get Ole Miss into the national conversation and the SEC conversation. And he's done that in spades. And this year, Ole Miss can surprise a lot of people. And I don't think that the SEC is as cut and dry as people think it is. Yes, Georgia and Texas are there. But after them, there are teams up and coming who might knock them off their perch. And Ole Miss has a good chance this year to do that. And it's all because of Jaxson Dart. Now let's talk about all his departures. He loses a big one in his backfield in Quinshon Judkins. But Jordan Waters is an apt replacement. And Jaxson Dart is going to be proving a lot of people that he doesn't necessarily need Quinshon Judkins in the backfield to look like a star. Without further ado, let's jump into the stats that make Jaxson Dart so appealing and what you might have missed in terms of undervaluing him. 3,364 yards last year, 23 touchdowns, 5 interceptions for him. 9.4 yards per attempt. He's really flinging the football down the field, really catching the eyes of many people in terms of that regard, and he will catch your eye if you didn't know his game beforehand. His best game was against LSU. That's a team that he's going to have to win against this year as well. 42.6 fantasy points, 26 for 39, 389 yards, 4 touchdowns, 50 rushing yards, and 1 touchdown as well. We do know that Jaxson Dart does have that dual threat ability at the QB position. His worst, though, was against Georgia. Only 5.5 fantasy points, 10 for 17, 112 yards, 1 interception. And so, I do believe that Jaxson Dart has a unique opportunity this year. Georgia comes to his house, and he doesn't necessarily have the most daunting SEC schedule. So, the reason why I think Jaxson Dart can't be underestimated isn't necessarily because of that manageable schedule. It's because he's always been doing it. And he can't help it if the team doesn't perform around him against teams like Georgia and Alabama and now Texas. And so, consider Jaxson Dart. He's really gotten this Ole Miss squad ahead of schedule. And so, keeping it on schedule just means that, hey, he knows he has the opportunity to do something even bigger than Ole Miss thought. They have the 12-team CFP. There's less, margin for error. There's, more opportunities for him to kind of slip up. But also, there's less margin for error because, say Ole Miss only loses that one game to Georgia. that means they're an SEC championship contender, and that means they're definitely a CFP. If they lose 2 games, they're also considered for the CFP. It's all about now just understanding that this opportunity is the opportunity for the Ole Miss Rebels to really get the respect they deserve, and Jaxson Dart to finally get the respect he deserves. Let's talk about his receiving corps, because this receiving corps is one of the best in the nation. Juice Wells is a JUCO transfer who formerly played for LSU. I think he's going to be an exciting, electrifying player, a deep threat for him. Then you bring back Trey Harris, who had 985 yards and 8 touchdowns, second in the SEC last year, and Watkins, who had 741 yards and 3 touchdowns, and so this is a very experienced wide receiver room. Now, when I think about what Ole Miss represents in college football, I think that this year's motto for them should be embrace the chaos, but not just within your own team. Because Ole Miss has always played in a lot of shootout games. That's where you might have learned of the legend of Jaxson Dart. These iconic shootouts between teams like LSU, Alabama in the past. All these teams that were in that mid-tier, and Ole Miss playing all these shootouts, and Jaxson Dart really shining. But this year is going to be different because the SEC is going to be a lot more like shootout style, in my humble opinion. You bring in 2 experienced Big 12 teams who are accustomed to playing in shootout games. And now you have this dynamic where these teams like Ole Miss, LSU, maybe even Kentucky this year, Missouri, I think that these teams are also going to try and take down the big dogs. Jaxson Dart fits that profile so well because of his devil-may-care approach to the game. That's what I love about him. No matter what was happening at the time in the Ole Miss program, whether they were bad or whether they were getting their asses handed to them by, Georgias and Alabamas, all of that worry goes away. Now, Ole Miss can embrace the chaos they see around them and say, hey, we have a unique opportunity here. This is the first time there's a 12-team CFP. So we're just, the 3rd or 4th best SEC team. That's enough. And if I pull up this Ole Miss schedule here, I see this as perhaps the most manageable of quote-unquote SEC contenders here because, like I said, Georgia comes to their place, and I think they miss Texas. They miss Texas. That's a huge thing. They play Georgia late in the season, November 9th, and they have a very manageable non-conference schedule as well. I say another big game, October 12th against LSU. That could be a shootout game. Oklahoma then the 2 weeks after that. And then that's smooth sailing from there. I don't see a team that really worries Ole Miss outside of Georgia on their schedule. And like I said, that game is at home for them. And so, when I think about what this means for Jaxson Dart, and what this means for Ole Miss football, I think that in order for Jaxson Dart to have a quote-unquote successful season, all he needs to do is just be himself, but without Judkins. It's kind of funny to say that because Quinton Judkins was a huge part of what Ole Miss did last year, because he really set the table for what Jaxson Dart did. If Jaxson Dart can be, Quinton Judkins may have been the star, but I deserve the respect that a lot of people may have not seen or recognized within me. He has the weapons to do it as well. Jaxson Dart, first and foremost, also needs to realize that he's not alone. Because this was a whole team effort to get to this point. from where he started his Ole Miss career a couple years ago to where he is now, the chance to compete in the college football playoff is very special. So he needs to realize that on every step of the way, these guys have played with him before. They understand him. They understand the system. Lane Kiffin trusts him. And the schedule is manageable. You can lose 2 games in the schedule. Let's say you lose to LSU and Georgia, because those are perhaps the 2 games where it's kind of up in the air about who will win. You're still in primo position for a college football playoff berth. That's saying something from where this program was at the start of the Lane Kiffin era, and the start of the Jaxson Dart era for that matter, to now. So just play the games the way you want to play them. Play with your style, Jaxson Dart, and you, my friend, will be a SEC contender. If you don't, then I think this whole project and experiment will come collapsing down on them, and then you will have disappointed a lot of fantasy managers. But in terms of fantasy, I still think Jaxson Dart is a little bit undervalued, so do please consider him. That will just about do it for this segment. Our last segment of today's show, everyone's favorite college football journeyman with an incredible story to tell. We'll be right back to conclude the show with him after this quick break.